The mountain did not welcome visitors. Its name was a whisper on the wind, a half-remembered threat in the lullabies of the valley people. Ignis Peak, the seat of cinders, the ever-burning throne. To Alara, standing at its treacherous base with a pack too heavy for her 16-year-old shoulders and a resolve forged in desperation, it was not a myth. It was her last resort. The air itself tasted of old smoke and simmering stone, and the narrow, zigzagging path before her seemed less a trail and more a scar upon the mountain's face. Below, in the verdant valley cradled by lesser hills, her village was dying. Not from plague or war, but from a creeping, inexplicable cold. It had begun subtly, a frost in late spring that blackened the first buds, a summer morning that saw breath clouding in the air. Then the river started to slow, a skin of ice forming at its edges even at noon. The sun grew pale, a weakened coin in a leaden sky. Crops failed, livestock grew thin and listless. The elders spoke of an imbalance, a theft of warmth from the world. Their oldest stories, ones told over guttering fires, blamed the dragon emperor who slumbered in the heart of Ignis Peak. He was the keeper of the world's deep fires, they said, a being of primordial arrogance who had turned his back on the surface world, letting its heat seep back into his hoard of molten gold and memory. Alara's little brother, Kale, had taken the worst of it. His breath came in shallow, rattling gasps, his small body too frail to fight the unnatural chill that had settled in his lungs. Their mother's eyes, once bright as the summer sky, were now wells of silent despair. The village healer could only shake his head. "The cold is not of this world," he'd murmured. "It needs a fire that is also not of this world to cure it." So, Alara had gone. Not as a warrior, or a chosen one, but as a sister. She'd stolen the ancient, half-charred map from the elder's scroll case, packed what dried meat and hard bread she could, and slipped away in the dead of a night so cold it felt solid. Her weapon was a simple hunting knife. Her shield was a locket with a curl of Kale's hair. Her plan was non-existent. She would climb the forbidden mountain, find the dragon emperor, and ask. Beg. Barter her life for his warmth. The climb was a week of agony. The thin air scraped her throat. Jagged rocks tore her clothes and skin. Strange, phosphorescent lichen provided an eerie glow in the perpetual twilight of the high altitudes, and the ground sometimes trembled underfoot, dislodging showers of scree that clattered into the abyss below. She slept in shallow caves, huddled against the stone, dreaming of Kale's feverish whispers and her mother's hands, worn and cold. Finally, the path ended at a vast, arching entrance carved into the mountain's very crown. It was no natural cave. The arch was a masterpiece of terrifying geometry, etched with runes that pulsed with a dim, internal light the color of dying embers. Heat radiated from it in visible waves, warping the air. This was it. The Gate of Sighs, the map had labeled it. Alara's mouth was parched, her body a symphony of aches. She took a deep breath that scorched her lungs, tightened the strap of her pack, and stepped into the throat of the mountain. The inside was not a cavern, but a cathedral. A colossal, hollowed-out geode of a world. The ceiling, impossibly high, was studded with raw crystals that glowed with captured firelight. Rivers of molten rock, slow and majestic as lava, wound through the floor far below the wide, polished stone bridge she stood upon, casting everything in a hellish, beautiful orange and red light. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone, hot metal, and something ancient, the smell of stone that had never known sunlight, of time measured in geological epochs. And in the center of it all, upon a dais of black obsidian that drank the light, he rested. The Dragon Emperor, Ignisar. He was larger than her village. His scales, the color of a starless midnight sky streaked with veins of captured magma, rose and fell with the slumberous rhythm of a continent breathing. Each plate was larger than a shield, etched with patterns more complex than any language. His great head, crowned with spiraling horns of volcanic glass, rested on his coiled limbs. His eyes were closed, but the lids, thin, leathery membranes, glimmered with inner fire. Wings of stretched shadow, webbed with a fine tracery of glowing fissures, were furled against his immense flanks. Power emanated from him, a physical pressure that made Alara's ears pop and her bones hum. This was no mere beast. This was a force of nature given shape and a terrible, weary consciousness. Terror, pure and absolute, turned her blood to ice water. Every instinct screamed to prostrate herself, to flee, to become invisible. But the image of Kale's blue-tinged lips flashed behind her eyes. She took one shuddering step forward onto the bridge. The sound of her worn boot on the stone was a blasphemy in the immense silence. "Great One," she called out, her voice a frail reed against the roar of distant lava flows. It echoed, pathetic and small, and died. Nothing. She ventured further, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. "Dragon Emperor, Lord of the deep fires. I come from the valley below. My people are freezing. My brother is dying. We need your help." The silence deepened, if that were possible. It was a listening silence, a heavy, disdainful quiet. Then, a low rumble began, not from the mountain, but from the dais. It vibrated through the soles of her feet, up her spine, into her teeth. One great, slit-pupiled eye, the size of a wagon wheel and burning with a core of liquid sun, opened. It focused on her with a concentration that felt like being pinned under a falling star. The voice that filled the chamber was not a sound heard with ears, but a resonance felt in the marrow, a tectonic shift in the soul. It was deep, old, and thick with the dust of forgotten ages. A speck. The word carried the weight of millennia. A buzzing, perishable speck. You trespass in the hull of eternal ember. You interrupt the long silence. For what? To wine of cold. Alara fell to her knees, not in reverence, but from the sheer force of the presence focused upon her. "Please," she gasped, the hot air searing her throat. "The warmth is leaving the world. Our sun is weak. The stories say you hold the deep fires. If you could just spare a spark." The stories. A plume of smoke, smelling of sulfur and sadness, curled from his nostrils. The stories of mortals are children's scribbles on the pages of time. Your world is a fleeting sigh. You're cold as a season. I have slept through the birth and death of 1,000 of your worlds. Your suffering is a brief, irrelevant noise. The eye began to slowly close. Irrelevant. The word shot out of her, sharpened by a sudden, desperate anger. She staggered to her feet. My brother's breath is irrelevant. The farmer's withered field, the mother's empty cradle, is that all we are to you? Noise. The eye stopped its descent. It regarded her again, and this time, she saw something beyond ancient indifference. A flicker of weary annoyance, perhaps even a ghost of curiosity at the speck's defiance. You speak of connections, of bonds. They are frail threads that snap in the first wind of eternity. I have seen empires built on such bonds crumble to dust, heard the grandest loves dissolve into echoes. Why should the transient chill of your ephemeral kin concern the keeper of the primeval flame? Because you're here, Alara cried out, her voice breaking. She gestured wildly at the magnificent, desolate chamber. You're not just fire. You're here, in this mountain, in this room. You chose a place. You have a throne. That means you're part of a world, even if it's just this one. And if you're part of it, you have a responsibility to it. A silence followed, more profound than the last. The lava rivers bubbled. Then, a sound like grinding continents filled the air. It took Alara a terrified moment to realize it was a laugh. A dry, mirthless, deeply lonely laugh. Responsibility. A concept invented by short-lived creatures to impose order on their chaos. Very well, little Buzz. You amuse me with your mortal audacity. You have climbed my mountain. You have stood in my presence and not been reduced to ash by your own terror. I will consider your plea. He shifted, an earthquake of scale and sinew. A single claw, longer than she was tall and sharper than any blade, extended from his forelimb. With a deliberate, slow motion, he tapped the obsidian dais beside him. A fragment the size of her head cracked off, its interior glowing with a fierce, white-hot light. With a deftness astonishing for something so vast, he flicked it. It sailed through the air, a comet of condensed heat, and landed with a crackle on the bridge a few feet from her, embedding itself in the stone. The heat that washed over her was immediate and intense, like opening the door of a forge. That is a shard of my dais, infused with a sliver of the ever-burning heart. It will burn for a century. It will warm your valley. Take it and go. Your bond is served. Do not return. The great eye closed fully, the dismissal final. Alara stared at the glowing shard. It was a miracle. It was salvation. It was more than she had dared hope for. She should grab it, fashion some kind of carrier with her pack, and run back down the mountain as fast as her legs could carry her. But she didn't move. The Emperor's words echoed in her. Frail threads that snap. Grandest loves dissolve into echoes. They weren't just the words of a powerful being. They were the words of a profoundly lonely one. His grandeur was a prison. His eternity, a burden. He had given her a stone, but he had also, inadvertently, shown her a glimpse of his own immense, frozen heart. Cautiously, she approached the shard. The heat was blistering, but it was a clean, dry heat. She used her knife to pry at the edges of her leather water skin, cutting a large square. Wrapping her hands in spare cloth, she managed to work the glowing fragment onto the leather and fold it over, creating a rudimentary, intensely hot bundle. She tied it with cord. The warmth seeped through, comforting and potent. She turned to leave, then stopped. She looked back at the slumbering colossus, a dark mountain against a mountain of fire. He had given her what she asked for. But he was wrong. A bond wasn't a transaction. It couldn't be settled with a payment of fire. "Thank you," she said softly, to the sleeping form. The words were swallowed by the cavern's immensity, but she said them anyway. The journey down was faster, fueled by hope and the radiating heat from the bundle she carried carefully. When she stumbled into her village, half dead from exhaustion but with her eyes blazing, a crowd gathered in disbelieving silence. She presented the shard to the elders. They built a stone basin in the village square, placed the fragment within, and as the sun set on another frigid day, a new sun was born in their midst. Heat poured forth in a visible aureole. The ice at the river's edge hissed and melted. Color returned to pallid cheeks. Within days, the unnatural chill began to recede. Kale, wrapped in blankets by the stone basin, opened his eyes. They were clear. He took a deep, unrattled breath and smiled at his sister. "You're warm," he whispered. Alara held him, tears of relief cutting tracks through the grime on her face. The village celebrated her as a heroine. But in the quiet moments, by the light of their salvaged hearth, her thoughts wandered back up the mountain. She saw not just the terrifying emperor, but the weight in his one opened eye, the echo in his laugh. He had called her bond with Kale a frail thread. But that thread had pulled her up an impossible mountain. It had given her the courage to speak to a god. Frailty was not in the connection itself, but in the refusal to tend it. A month later, with the valley safely on the path to recovery, Alara found herself packing again. Her mother watched, fear and understanding warring in her eyes. "You have to go back," she stated, not asked. "I took his fire," Alara said, placing a small pouch of sun-dried berries from their first recovered harvest into her pack. "But I left my thanks hanging in the air. It doesn't feel even. He is not a man, Alara. You cannot settle a debt with a dragon emperor." "It's not a debt," Alara said, slinging the pack over her shoulder. She kissed Kale's sleeping forehead. "It's a thread." The climb was familiar this time, though no less dangerous. The gate of sighs loomed as before. The immense, hot silence of the inner chamber welcomed her with the same oppressive majesty. Ignacar rested on his dais, exactly as she had left him, as if a millennium had passed in a blink. She walked to the same spot on the bridge. This time, she did not kneel. She simply stood, waiting. Hours passed. The rhythms of the deep earth continued. Finally, with a sigh that stirred cyclones of hot ash in the distant recesses, the great eye opened. The sun-core pupil fixed on her. The mental voice held no surprise, only a deep, resonant boredom. "The buzzing returns. Has your trinket failed so soon?" The trinket works perfectly, Alara said, her voice steady. My valley is green. My brother is running again. I came back to thank you. Properly. Properly. The concept seemed to puzzle him. Gratitude is a currency that holds no value here. I have continents of gold, rivers of gem fire. Your thanks are less than dust. I didn't bring thanks as currency, she said. She reached into her pack and pulled out the pouch. I brought you these. She stepped forward, as close to the dais as the blistering heat would allow, and placed the pouch of dried berries on a prominent jut of obsidian. The eye regarded the tiny cloth sack. What is this? There's summer, Alara said simply. Taste of sun on the vines, of rain on the soil. You gave us a piece of your fire. I brought you a piece of our world. A long, long pause. Then, a tendril of smoke, almost delicate, extended from a nostril. It coiled around the pouch, lifted it with impossible precision, and brought it before the eye. I do not consume organic matter. You don't have to eat them, Alara said. Just know they're there. A reminder that the fleeting sigh has flavors. That the brief noise can be a song. She turned to leave. Wait. The command was not thunderous, but it held her in place as surely as chains. She looked back. The great head had lifted slightly off his forelimbs. The eye studied her with an intensity that was new, a searching, analytical light. You are not afraid. It was an observation, not a question. I am, Alara admitted. Terrified. But I'm more afraid of becoming like you. The chamber seemed to grow colder for a heartbeat. Explain. You have everything. Eternal fire. Unimaginable power. A throne at the heart of the world. But you have nothing. No flavors. No songs. Just an endless, silent watch over a hoard that keeps you warm but can't keep you company. That is a colder fate than any my village faced. She expected anger, a cataclysmic roar, the end of her short, buzzing life. Instead, the Dragon Emperor, Ignisar, keeper of the primeval flame, slowly lowered his head. The glowing pouch of berries rested before him like an offering to an unimaginable god. Go, little Buzz, he murmured, the psychic voice softer now, weary in a different way. Your thread is thin, but it is strangely persistent. Alara went, but she came back, again and again. Her visits became a strange, irregular punctuation in the endless sentence of his existence. She did not come every week, or even every season. She came when she had something to share. A perfectly round river stone, smoothed by time and water. A recording crystal from a traveling minstrel, etched with a simple, soaring melody. A sketch she'd made of Kale, now healthy and strong, trying to fly a kite. She would place her offering on the same jut of obsidian, which had become, unofficially, her plinth, and she would talk. Not just to beg or thank, but to tell. She told him of the apple harvest, of the foolish village boy who tried to court her, of her mother's new laughter lines. She spoke of small, human things. The joy of cold water on a hot day, the ache of a stubbed toe, the comforting smell of bread baking. At first, He was silent, or offered only a curt, dismissive rumble. But gradually, his responses changed. He began to ask questions. Why does the kite bring joy? It is a rag on a string. It's not about the kite, Alara explained, sitting cross-legged on the bridge, feeling the familiar, now almost comforting, heat on her skin. It's about the wind on your face. It's about making something dance that shouldn't be able to. It's about the try. The try, he repeated, the word foreign in his mind voice. Once, after she described the funeral of the village elder, the stories told, the tears shed, the sense of a life fully lived passing into memory, he was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen back into the long silence. Then he spoke, his voice a distant tremor. You mark an ending with ceremony. You wrap it in story and send it on its way. We merely endure the absence. The silence where a continent's song used to be. It was the first time he had spoken of himself, of his own experience. On her 12th visit, she brought a problem. A blight was affecting the valley's grain, a gray rot no healer could cure. It wasn't a magical cold, just a natural pestilence, but it was devastating. She spoke of it not to ask for another magical solution, but out of sheer, worried frustration. Fire purges, he mused aloud. But it would purge your fields to ash. Your problems are so damp, so fungal. He was silent, thinking. Then, a wisp of steam, not smoke, issued from his mouth. It coalesced in the air before her into a complex, three-dimensional pattern of shimmering heat. A diagram of crop rotation, soil aeration, a specific mineral that could be ground and sprinkled to change the soil's balance. It was ageless knowledge, gleaned from watching the very bones of the world shift and reform. This may help. It is not fire. It is memory of Earth. Alara memorized the pattern with awe. She brought the knowledge down the mountain. It worked. The blight receded. She returned to tell him, her excitement palpable. You saved us again. But differently. I adjusted a balance, he said, and she could have sworn she felt a flicker of something akin to satisfaction emanate from him. It is a quieter magic. Years trickled by. Alara was no longer a girl, but a young woman. Her visits were the constant of her life, a secret pilgrimage. The mountain path became as familiar as the path to her own home. The villagers knew she went to the high places to gather rare herbs. They had their suspicions, but the enduring warmth in the square and their prosperity kept questions gentle. One day, she arrived carrying not a pouch or a stone, but a weight in her heart she couldn't articulate. She sat on the bridge, knees drawn to her chest, and simply wept. Silent, shaking sobs for no reason and every reason, the pressure of being the village's unofficial guardian, the loneliness of her strange double life, the relentless, beautiful, terrifying passage of time that she now understood in a way she never had before. The heat in the chamber seemed to diminish, just a fraction. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, tears blurring the hellish light. Ignacar had moved. He had uncoiled his neck and brought his head down, not to the dais, but to the bridge itself. His massive jaw rested on the stone a mere 20 feet from her, his eye level with hers. It was the closest he had ever been. "This is grief," his voice echoed softly in her mind. "But not for a death. For the erosion of moments." She nodded, unable to speak, shocked by his proximity, by the accuracy of his perception. "I have known such grief for epochs. It is the taste of time itself for my kind. You are tasting it prematurely, little Buzz. It is too sharp for you." A warmth, not scorching but gentle, like a blanket held before a fire, radiated from him and wrapped around her. It was a conscious effort, a containment of his infernal power into something manageable, nurturing. "Your tears are a storm. They will pass. The sun in your valley, the real sun, will feel different after." She cried until she was empty. The gentle warmth never left. When her sobs subsided into hiccups, she looked into the giant eye, so close she could see fractal patterns of gold swimming in the molten iris. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she whispered. "No," he replied, his mental voice a deep, soft hum. "But it changes. The ache becomes a companion. A proof that what was lost was resonant." He paused. "You have given me many resonances, Alara." It was the first time he had ever used her name. The dynamic shifted irreversibly that day. He was no longer a distant emperor dispensing favors to an amusing mortal. She was no longer a brave girl throwing pebbles at a mountain. They were something else. Two consciousnesses at opposite ends of the spectrum of existence, who had somehow found a frequency on which they could both vibrate. He began to share in return. Not just answers to questions, but unsolicited fragments of his eternity. He showed her, through heat haze projections, the world as it was when mountains were young. Vast fern forests under a violet sky, great beasts of stone and steam that roamed plains of cooling lava. He spoke of the first music, the resonant song of the planet's core that only beings of his kind could hear, and the melancholy that settled when the continents solidified and the song grew fainter, overlaid with the chaotic, chattering symphony of life. She, in turn, brought the symphony to him. She described the first cry of a newborn lamb, the argument of married love, the solemn silence of a snowfall. She brought a snowflake, preserved with immense difficulty in a chilled metal box, and let him watch it melt on the warm stone of her plinth. He observed its crystalline perfection with the focus of a scholar studying a lost civilization. One visit, she found him not on his dais, but at the far end of the great chamber, where one of the lava rivers plunged into a bottomless well. He was staring into the abyss, his posture radiating a desolation so profound it made the air ache. "What is it?" she asked, her voice small in the face of his monumental sorrow. "They are gone," he said, the words barely a whisper in her soul. "The last of the deep singers. I felt its light go out, far below. I am the last. The final note of the first music." The weight of his loneliness crashed over her, a tangible force. For all her human understanding of loss, this was beyond her comprehension. The end of a species, the silencing of a song as old as the world. She did not offer empty platitudes. She did not speak. She simply walked forward, to the very edge of the safe ground, as close to him as the radiant heat would allow, and sat down. She opened the simple lunch she'd brought, bread and cheese, and began to eat. A small, human ritual of continuance in the face of cosmic finality. She sat in silent companionship with his grief for hours, sharing nothing but her presence, a tiny, warm-blooded proof that life, in some form, persisted. When she finally rose to leave, his voice stopped her. "Stay a little longer." It was not a command. It was a request, the first he had ever made. So she stayed, and their conversations deepened further. He taught her to see the heat lines of the world, to understand the poetry of tectonic plates. She taught him about metaphors, about how human language could tie two unlike things together to create a new truth. He called her little flame keeper, not of his fire, but of the small, bright warmth of mortal experience. She called him Ignacar, without title, and the name, in her mouth, became not a label of power, but an address to a friend. Decades passed. Alara's hair began to show threads of silver. Kale had children of his own. The village thrived under the gentle, unseen guidance that flowed down the mountain, a hint about a coming drought, a suggestion for a new trade route. The basin fire still burned, undimmed. Ignacar changed too. The weary arrogance had melted away, replaced by a watchful, deep curiosity. He began to experiment, not with grand magic, but with subtle influences. He would gently steer a warm wind towards the valley during a cold snap, or encourage a particular mineral vein to surface near their mines. He was gardening, on a planetary scale, and his primary focus was the valley of the Little Buzz. Alara, now a woman of wisdom and some authority in the village, arrived one autumn day feeling the years in her bones. The climb was harder now. Ignacar saw it immediately. As she sat, catching her breath on the bridge, a concern, tender and fierce, emanated from him. "Your light flickers, little flame keeper. The wind grows stronger. It's just age, Ignacar," she said with a smile. "Another human thing. The flame burns lower, but it often burns brighter just before it goes out. Do not speak of it going out." The rumble held a note of panic that startled her. I have not finished learning the taste of your sunberries." "There will be others," she said gently. "Others will bring you things. I do not want things from others." The force of the thought was a hot wind that pushed her back. "I want your stories. Your flawed, fleeting, brilliant stories. They are my resonance. You cannot leave." It was a child's plea from an ancient being. Her heart broke for him. "I don't have a choice." "That's the thread, Ignacar. It's beautiful because it snaps. You taught me that what is lost was resonant. Make sure I am resonant." He fell into a silence so deep and mournful it felt like the chamber itself was holding its breath. On what would be her last visit, she knew it. Her body was failing. She brought nothing in her pack but herself. She walked slowly to her usual spot. He was waiting, his head lowered to the bridge, his eye level with her. He had never greeted her thus before. "Hello, old friend," she said, her voice thin but clear. Alara. Her name was a caress of mind fire, a blessing and a lament. She sat, and they talked. Not of great things, but of small ones. The way the light hit the valley in late afternoon. The smell of the first rain on dry soil. The sound of Kale's granddaughter's laughter. She told him everything was in order. The village would be safe. He would not be alone. She had left letters, instructions, a legacy of understanding for a few chosen successors who would tend the basin fire and, perhaps, one day, be brave enough to climb the mountain. It will not be the same, he said, the grief in his voice a bottomless chasm. No, she agreed softly. It will be different. But different isn't nothing. Remember the kite. It's about the try. She grew tired. The heat of the chamber, once so challenging, now felt like a comfort against her old bones. Ignacar, she whispered, may I come closer? The warmth is nice. A tremor went through the mountain. Slowly, with infinite care, he extended one immense forelimb. He laid the back of his great hand, where the scales were slightly smoother, on the bridge before her. It was like a plateau of warm, living stone. With a final effort, Alara climbed onto it. She lay down, cradled in the vast cup of his claws, her body against the scale that radiated a gentle, life-sustaining heat. It was the safest, most profound embrace imaginable. Thank you, his voice murmured in the heart of her being, for the threads. For the noise. For the summer berries. Thank you, she breathed, her eyes closing, for the fire. For the memory of earth. For listening. She felt his awareness wrap around her, not as a consuming force, but as a vigil. A guarding of her final, quiet flicker. In the heart of the mountain, cradled in the hand of a dragon, Alara, the human girl, let go. Her last sensation was not of an ending, but of a profound, warm connection, a thread spun not of silk, but of shared sunsets and understood silences, stretching across the impossible gulf between a moment and an eternity. It held. In the valley, the basin fire in the square pulsed once, brightly, and then settled into a steady, golden glow. In the mountain, Ignacar, the last emperor, did not withdraw his hand for 100 years. He held the empty vessel of his friend, learning the shape of her absence, letting her final resonance settle into his ancient bones. When he finally moved, it was with a new purpose. He gently placed her body in a niche of crystalline flowers that had grown from the heat of his own breath over the centuries. Then, he turned his gaze outward, through the stone, to the valley below. He saw Kale's grandchildren, saw the vibrant, fragile web of life she had loved. The long silence was over. He had a garden to tend. And high on Ignis Peak, if one knew where to look, a new, subtle rune glowed beside the ancient gate of sighs. It was not a warning, nor a symbol of power. It was a word, in the language of deep earth and human heart, forged in an unlikely bond. It simply read, "Remember,